Well, Americans today hold a wide range of religious views. Some see that diversity as one of our country's great strengths. But according to researcher George Barna, it can also work against us.
What if America's greatest enemy is not Al-Qaeda or Iran, but actually America itself? The United States is hailed as a melting pot of ethnic and religious diversity. But could this trait actually stand in the way of a common vision that once made our nation so great? Researcher George Barna has spent 25 years analyzing faith and culture in America. In his new book, The 7 Faith Tribes, he breaks the nation down into 7 belief groups: casual Christians, captive Christians, skeptics, Jews, Mormons, pantheists, and Muslims. Barna says to renew America, each tribe must seek common ground, open dialogue, and shared moral values with the other tribes. He has a firm and somewhat controversial message for Christians from his own tribe. He says it's time for Christians to accept the realities of multiculturalism and religious pluralism.
Well, welcome back to their 700 Club, our dear friend George Barna. George, you seem to be more controversial than us sometimes with some of your research here.
It's not my goal.
But you're succeeding at it. I mean, you've come out with some things that I think are huge wake-up calls for the church in America. And your latest one is actually a wake-up call for me that, you know, you are actually advocating that Christians in America have sort of got to get to the point of recognizing that we are in a multicultural situation now, and the sooner we accept that, it's actually going to make it better. Why?
Well, when you look at our nation, and we did this massive research project to try to figure out what really is happening spiritually in America, we found that there were these 7 different groups, and even within the Christian community, which is huge, you've got 2 different groups that see things very differently and try to integrate their faith into their lives in very different ways. So for us to recognize those kinds of differences, and for those of us who are part of this tribe that I would call captive Christians, we really live our lives for Christ, we've got to recognize that we haven't been called necessarily just to go out and evangelize. That's all we do. More than anything, we've been called to love people. And when we look at the impressions of other tribes, of captive Christians in particular, they're seen as judgmental and intolerant and unforgiving, not understanding, not liking other people other than their own kind, their own tribe. And that's a kind of an indictment against us. Jesus would not have, had that kind of perception in the minds of people. Of all things, they would have said, he does love people. And that's what we need to get back to, where people see us as lovers of others.
Well, Jesus was provocative, and he
Absolutely.
did actively engage his culture and actively engage his culture in terms of what is right and wrong. Have you been misinterpreted on this, that we're maybe less aggressive is not the right word, but perhaps we should be more loving in our approach and perhaps take some guide from Francis of Assisi that, if you're going to preach, do it all the time, and sometimes you have to use words.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the key skills that maybe we need to hone is that of listening, really building the relationships with others so that we have the opportunity for them to hear us in context, not out of context. Sometimes we're saying the right words, we're saying them the wrong way, we're saying them in the wrong context, we're saying them at the wrong time. So, I mean, we've got to look at the bigger picture and understand how do we love first and worry about correcting second.
Has political involvement played a role in the perception here? Has Christianity been politicized to a point in our culture that's the main driver of the perception in the non-Christian groups?
It's an interesting dynamic because I think that's true to some extent. But as we do our research trying to figure out, but then how do people make their political choices? What we find is that by and large, we're a very ill-informed group of people. We don't really get very many facts. Now, part of that is because of how we go about getting our facts. We'll watch a 30-second media clip, right, from a place that has a particular point of view that they're pushing.
That will be emotional-based,
yes,
as opposed to fact-based.
Right.
And I perhaps know too much about the political process, and I'm getting very cynical about it, that these guys actually believe that works because it does work.
Right. And so what people wind up doing is when they vote or when they make their political choices, they do so on the basis of the personality of the characters involved, how it feels. It really is an emotional rather than an integrated experience where we're thinking as well as feeling based on everything that we've been able to gather through some real hard effort to understand the totality of a situation.
So we're electing media personalities as opposed to really deliberating policy that they're going to implement in office.
We vote for caricatures, is basically what it comes down to.
The Founding Fathers are actually quite concerned about that. And we're very concerned about free democracy, which is why we were created as a republic. And they wanted checks and balances, that we wouldn't be governed by the mob.
That's a part of it. And two, when you go back, you know, part of the research for this book had to do with the values on which the country was based. And what I discovered is that there was a group of core values the Founding Fathers said, if people understand these and they integrate these into their lives, we can remain a great, strong, cohesive republic. But if they abandon these things and they pursue self-interest, there's no healthy dialogue about these kinds of issues, there's no common vision based on these shared values that leads us to a sense of the common good, which was something they were very interested in, then we're going to lose it all. And that's what worries me about today.
Now, they kept talking about the common weal. It's a sort of old English word, but it really, I mean, I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it's all about the common weal. What is good for the most people, and can we come to agreement on that? You're talking to a large number of what you call captive Christians. What would you tell them is the sort of the way out of this, and how long will it take?
Two tough questions. First, let's talk way out of the situation. We've got to recognize that we do live in a diverse culture, and that we can't look at ourselves as the supreme group. We have to look at ourselves as part of a body of people, all of whom God loves and wants to come to know him in a deeper way. And in order for us to be part of that process and to cooperate with him in reaching those people, we have to take our responsibilities seriously to be good citizens, not just good church members. And so to be good citizens, we do have to really listen to people. We have to love people. We have to open up dialogue. We have to go back to the core values that we share with all these other faith tribes and that are the foundation of the country. Things like respecting the elderly, investing in the young, treating other people the way you'd like to be treated, recognizing that you better get your own act together before you start criticizing other people. I mean, all of these things which are biblical, and begin to live them so that people see, you know what? Gordon's a good guy. You know, I may not agree with him on everything, but I'm going to listen to him. I want to hear what he says. I want to understand. And begin to build those relational bridges so that there is some cohesion and unity in the country. But in the course of doing that, that means that family has to be very much focused on the fact that I, as a parent, am responsible for who my children become. It's not the school's job. It's not the government's job. It's not the community's job. It's my and my wife's job. And so I need to figure out what are the values that I need to embed within my children so that they become good citizens, not only of this world, but of God's kingdom. Secondly, I've got to look at the leaders and recognize people only lead because we invite them to lead. We allow them to lead. And so I've got to be very careful about who I choose to allow to lead me. And then as a follower, I have to recognize I'm not just a victim. I add something to this process. So I have to really think through and understand what it is I'm adding in terms of value. Media is huge. As we do our research, and I know you've seen some of this, the media have the greatest influence of anything in American culture today. But our research also shows, in a study we haven't released yet, that most Americans are literally addicted to media exposure. We went back to the American Psychiatric Association and said, what do you define as an addiction? And we took those criteria and applied it to people and found out that most people are literally addicted to media, which can or cannot be good. I think in our case today, it's not good.
It's bad.
Yeah. And then finally, our faith communities. Our faith communities, to a large extent, have lost sight of what they're to do. When we went back and asked the leaders of Christian churches, what do you determine to be success? It all had to do with size and money and programs and buildings. It wasn't about transforming people's lives with truth and love. And so if we can begin to reintroduce those as the measures of true success, our faith communities can also add value in this process.
Okay. Well, you may not like everything you read in this book, but it will provoke thought. So I encourage you to get it, particularly if you're in any kind of leadership position. I think pastors everywhere ought to be reading this. The 7 Faith Tribes. It's available in bookstores across the country. George, keep up the good fight.
Gordon, great to be with you.
All right.